committee. I'm not going to issue the usual call for public comment because we don't seem to have any members of the public present. So with that, we pass to review and approval of the summary of actions from our last meeting.
A second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Passes unanimously. We call on everybody to review the attendance log, which, of course, we're just now beginning the year, so there's not a lot to review. If there are no requested corrections, we will proceed on to the meeting calendar. We're back to our usual schedule now that we're past the holidays. And if everybody would review their entry in the roster to see if there are any changes needed. I will have to check with our city clerk whether my appointment is actually up or whether I have another year. So there are no corrections there. I'll take those as accepted and pass right on to our one major discussion item. A review of the draft of the countywide Safe Routes to Schools needs assessment.
And that would be my presentation. Good evening, everyone.
Welcome.
It's taken us a little while. We are here now to present our draft needs assessment for Safe Routes to School projects and programs in Contra Costa. There are a lot of programs already, and there have been a number of Safe Routes to School projects that have been done over the last 5 or 10 years. Safe Routes to School has always been a concern, but it has a specific approach to safety for children walking or bicycling to school. It's been a relatively new thing. California had one of the first specific Safe Routes to School programs that Caltrans initiated several years ago. Contra Costa, we've got some money from MTC to do a study of what the needs are for Safe Routes to School in Contra Costa, and the report that's in your packet is our draft of that assessment. So let me go through what we did. The purpose of it was to understand what the needs are in the county, both programs and projects, to work with the program providers and different stakeholders to understand the extent of the need and to estimate how much fulfilling the need would cost. The basic approach is that we calculated how much we've spent on both projects and programs, and we've extrapolated that for all the public schools in the county. And we worked with an oversight committee of local staff and staff who provide Safe Routes to School programs throughout the county to come up with a method for doing that and make sure that it's reasonable as we can make it. There's some caveats. We only focused on public schools. Private schools are a little different. They draw from a much larger area, and walking and bicycling to private schools for the students who attend there is a little bit more problematic and doesn't happen quite so often. We based the study on the existing information as much as we had, and there hasn't been that much of a focus on Safe Routes to School in terms of the planning. There's certainly been projects and programs that have occurred. The project estimates thus were based on a fairly small sample size, so we can assume that the plus or minus is going to be pretty substantial. We had to make a number of assumptions and had to simplify the information we had to do that extrapolation that I mentioned before. Let me go through the capital project assessment first. What we did was we started with a list of recently completed projects in Contra Costa. We categorized them by project type, calculated the average cost for those types of projects. We accounted for some unusual projects. By that I mean projects that don't occur very often and are unusually expensive. An example of that would be the improved pedestrian overcrossing over I-80 that connects, I've forgotten the name of the elementary school. There's an elementary school on the east side that's, I think, in San Pablo, but the neighborhood on the west side is in Richmond and San Pablo, and it would be an improved pedestrian overcrossing there. And the overcrossings like that are unusually expensive. Another example is a major sidewalk improvement to an elementary school in Walnut Creek that would require widening a road substantially, providing a lot more drainage improvements to provide the sidewalk to the school. Once we've accounted for those costs, then we estimated the countywide cost if we were to apply those needs throughout to those 217 schools, private public schools in Contra Costa. Here's a sort of a short summary to show how we did it. That we had 4 major project types. There were major roadway sidewalk improvements, and on page 3 in the assessment, we talk a bit about those project types. The major ones are if there is a completely new sidewalk that needs curb and gutter, perhaps even building retaining walls. Those are expensive. We're assuming on average $1 million per project. Sidewalk improvements would be more substantial sidewalk improvements like bulb outs and improved crosswalks and flashing lights at the crosswalks. The basic sidewalk improvements would be more like improving the way they're built, replacing asphalt with concrete, for example, and making sure they're wide enough and up to current standards. Then basic safety improvements are signage primarily at roadway access points and perhaps bicycle racks at schools. And we assumed that about 1/3 of the schools within the county would need the first 3 of those, and that every school could benefit from those basic safety enhancement. And that's how we came up with the number $118 million for the capital needs for Safe Routes to School within Contra Costa. So we've already spent about $16 million, so the remaining need would be about $102. And then there's the cost of the unusual projects, and we're assuming that would be about an additional $141 million, for a total of $243 million, which is a big number. It's divided by 217 schools. It's a little over $1 million per school in Contra Costa. For the programs, we did a similar thing. We looked at how much it cost for the different providers in Contra Costa to provide the programs they're providing now, extrapolate that to countywide, and then calculate the cost for that expanded number of current programs and additional programs that we might add. So here's the summary of the estimate of the cost. If we just take the existing educational safety programs, like the contests they have in the San Ramon Valley School District, or the bike rodeos that they have in West well, I've forgotten what they call them, not like pep rallies, but they're for learning how to ride bicycles. They even have little computerized cars that demonstrate in those assemblies, school assemblies, that was the word I was looking for. The assemblies, they teach kids and demonstrate how to cross sidewalks safely. We're assuming that it would cost an additional $3.9 million every year to expand that to all 217 schools in the county. Now, there are a number of other programs that the program providers are not currently providing, but that they think would be good programs. They're listed in the assessment as well. One example is a parents' night out to help them understand some of the needs and ways that kids can walk to school or bike to school safely at their particular schools. And that would be another $5.2 million per year. And then there are some really expensive transportation programs that we might include. Subsidized transit passes is one of those, and yellow school bus programs. Those are very expensive programs. There are two existing programs for yellow school buses now. One's in San Ramon Valley, that's the newest one, and then there's a longer one that's been in place a longer time in La Miranda. And we use the cost there for those programs to estimate how much it would be to have yellow school buses throughout the county. So that's about $58 million per year for that, for expanding all of those programs and extending the existing programs. So what we're doing now is circulating that to the regional committees, and we're going to incorporate the results into our countywide transportation project list. That's the CTPL stands for, and into the 2014 countywide transportation plan. That's what we're currently developing. So, questions or comments?
Thank you, Brad. I have a couple questions. The subcommittee, who comprises that? I mean, you don't have to identify the individuals, but just sort of like basically who that is.
Well, there are basically three different program providers in Contra Costa who do Safe Route School programs. One of them is Contra Costa County Health Department. They have representatives on that committee. Another is San Ramon Valley School District. It's not their program, it's actually Danville, the county, and San Ramon. They have a staff person who does their programs. And their 511 Contra Costa, which is associated with Central and East County, has a program, and one of their staff people attends. We also have staff from the city of Pittsburgh and trying to remember who else, but some other local staff from jurisdictions also attend.
And is it part of the authority, or is it independent of the authority?
It's just a task force. It's a working group that advises authority staff and our consultants who are working on it.
Okay, and the projects that have already been completed, how was that funded? Was that authority funds, or was it from other sources?
Oh, it came from a variety of funds. Mostly not authority funds. The authority funds, the authority has a Safe Routes to Safe Transportation for Children category in Measure J. That money in Southwest County goes for the yellow school bus programs. Mm-hmm. The money in Central County hasn't been spent yet. They've allocated to the projects, but they haven't actually spent it. West County uses their money for for transit subsidies. Most of the funds come from federal sources and state sources.
Okay, and that actually brings me to my last question about future funding. My observation on this is that a lot of these projects don't just benefit transportation, but they also benefit the existing jurisdictions, the cities, the counties, and also the school districts. And my suggestion is that in order to leverage the funding, that I think that the authority might want to look at partnerships with the the various jurisdictions to sort of like being able to, have the school district pitch in, have the city pitch in, and have the authority pitch in. Maybe like with, what's the word, where you actually have grants that are dependent on local funds or something like that. I forget what
Well,
that's called.
the federal funds require a local match at least 11.5%, 11.47.
Yeah, but I'm saying that if there was any local money put in, I think it should be, by all the jurisdictions that are benefiting from this. In fact, one of the thoughts I had was with the return to source money, 18% return to source money, that we may consider having some of that allocated to improving the sidewalks, not just maintenance of the streets, but, for maintenance of the sidewalks and such, that could be eligible for some matching funds from the, from the authority. So,
Well, jurisdictions have used some of their 18% funds to improve sidewalks as well as, just doing pavement.
well, I'm just suggesting that maybe the authority might want to look into actually memorializing that into saying, hey, you have to, that you should pay some attention to the school districts, just kids going to school.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just a suggestion. Okay, thank you.
Question.
Sure.
Oh, yes, it works.
Yeah.
Why private school were excluded? The parents of the kids in private school pay taxes.
Part of it was we had a limited amount of funds. Part of it is that the private schools, the kids come from a longer distance. With walking, you can assume that people don't walk much more than a half mile, maybe 3/4 of a mile. With bicycling, it's about 5 miles, but that's a long distance for children to ride a bicycle. And with private schools, many of the students live further than 5 miles away from the schools themselves. For example, someone who works here has a daughter who attended Carondelet, and they live out in Antioch, and the school is, a couple 2.5 miles away from here on Treat in Concord. Yes, in Concord. Almost in Walnut Creek, but not quite. So, it was never an option for them to walk or bicycle to school. And that's true for a lot of private schools in the county. They have really different safe routes to school needs for private schools, and that's the reason.
You mentioned about signs and some other stuff, not necessarily sidewalks. And maybe should be included, but not in this kind of program like the schools when kids walk. But they need some help to protect them also.
There are a couple of issues with private schools. One is that they're private and not public schools. So one could argue that this general public money shouldn't be going to subsidize private schools. On the other side of the argument is that the impacts of parents driving their kids to a private school are on public streets, and can be money that's needed to fix the access to the street. The kinds of improvements that one would need, though, around a private school would be more about how you handle parents parking and letting their kids off in front of the school rather than how do the kids walk or bicycle to the school. So they have really different needs. And then there's the whole issue about public money for private schools.
Robert?
I've got some comments in the document itself, plus another comment with respect to private schools. You've got a bigger problem when the private school is a religious school, and public funds go and support religious schools. On page 1, the 217, you're talking about public schools only, not private schools. How do you classify a charter school?
They're public.
Okay.
They were included in the 217 schools.
Yeah, but that's a sort of comment that may
Right.
come up. On the next page, page 3, major roadway and sidewalk improvements. How are you classing when they do one side of the street versus two sides of the streets for sidewalks as a major improvement? Because I know the city of Concord did a lot of one-sided sidewalks with the last grants they got from the federal government.
Yes, I know. We looked at some of the improvements that were made that were specifically safe routes to school improvements. And we looked at how much they cost and what they involved. And it's not, we're not incredibly specific, and we had to make some judgment about where one project, was it a major roadway sidewalk improvement, was a streetscape improvement, and we did it based mostly on cost and not on, and some of its characteristics.
That may be something you want to consider on whether you're going to specify one side of the street or both sides of the street. Because when I saw it going in Concord, I said, why aren't they doing both sides of the street instead of just one side of the street? It didn't make sense.
Yeah, and that probably would have fit on, that particular project, I think, would have fit under safe streetscape improvements,
Yeah.
given its cost.
I have a comment. Robert's.
Go ahead.
Robert, are you finished?
No, I would just flip it through a couple pages for a bit finding. Were there any schools that do not need projects identified?
Well, we didn't go through every school, and this is one of the assumptions we made. There may be some schools that don't need anything. We assume that most schools could use some basic signage. The lowest, the one that we were assuming was only about $10,000.
I could debate those issues at Westwood and Concord High, the three schools right there together. I don't think there's any signs there because.
Right, but they're needed. We're assuming that there's some, I know there are some signs at that school,
Well,
because I live really close to there.
So I go there almost every day with for grandkids. So.
But there have been some signage placed there at the elementary school. But they're not permanent signs. They're just, brought out every morning and taken away every evening. So there could be some permanent signage done, and there have been some. They're not called speed bumps, but they're speed tables that are sort of double as a crosswalk at the same time. There's one in front of the elementary school as well. There could be since you've got a high school and middle school and an elementary right in the same vicinity at the same intersections, probably they could use more streetscape improvements than just main, basic signage.
Okay, but the whole point was just to say whether the none needed. Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
My only comment is, who is the audience of this? Because if you kind of read this letter from not having a lot of knowledge about it, it sounds pretty dire, to be perfectly honest, and it sounds, and I'm not sure this document really addresses what the real benefit is to this safe route to school. And I just think that could be one improvement. There's kind of a little portion here in the introduction, but I think that could be fleshed out, because if our tax-paying money is going to, I want to know this works, it's been proven to work, and so forth. But just a general thought.
No, that's a good point. The basic intent of this particular document is to get a handle on how much it would cost, and that's the simple reason for it. But you're right that if we were to make this more of a public document, incorporate it in a plan, more background on what's involved in Safer School, what the benefits are, how these different programs and projects have helped encourage more walking and bicycling to school would be
Sally,
needed, really.
are you done? Yeah.
Bob, I think one of the background elements missing is how far back in time did this go? I mean, you started it several years ago, didn't you? I know
Right.
Danville's been involved in it for 2 years at least, 3 maybe.
Well, the San Ramon Valley School District and the jurisdictions down there
There aren't
have
any
had a
Danville
program.
schools on your list, but there are San Ramon Valley ones, yes.
Right.
How many years has this been going on?
Well, I'm trying to remember how long they've had their program. It's been at least 5 years. The health district has done their program about 4 years. 511 Contra Costa has been doing Safe Routes to School programs for about 5 years as well.
And you've been collecting data all this time.
Well, we just collected the data within the last year. And we went and we talked to those 3 program providers about what they've been doing, how much it costs them now to do what they're
Yes,
doing.
you want now recent ones.
Recently. And then we talked to them about what if we were to expand it to all the schools in the county, how much would that cost? And what things are you doing, what things are you not doing now that you think would be a good idea? And let's see, what attachment is it? In the back, there's a description of new programs that education and safety programs and how much it would, some of the assumptions about how much it would cost. Things that are, there's a list of what's being done now and also a list of some things that the program providers think would be useful to add on, as well as expanding through it to all 230.
Has there been inflation?
We didn't assume, we assumed one cost, just to keep things simple.
I have one more question. Under programs, you have one that addresses traffic calming. What is traffic calming?
Well,
Very
the idea,
complicated.
the basic idea is that a lot of streets were designed for auto travel, and they tend, especially with like a straight street, people tend to drive fast on a straight street. It's straight and flat and wide, and they go fast. But people also walk or ride their bikes on the street. And if you drive a street that's got a speed bump on it, that's one form of traffic calming. There are lots of other kinds of improvements. Some people wouldn't call them improvements, but different projects. Chicanes are one of them, where the street goes this direction, then it makes this 45-degree angle and goes on. It has parking on one side and traffic lanes on the other side. And then it turns, and the parking's on that side, and the traffic lanes are on the other. Milvia in Berkeley is an example of a chicane. See, some people don't like that. But they do slow down traffic and make it more pleasant for the people who walk or bicycle on the street. Well, with chicanes, bicyclists aren't so happy with chicanes. Bicyclists have the same issues with speed bumps and speed humps and chicanes than drivers do.
Do the schools then teach this video-wise, or?
That's one way they do it in class or in school assemblies. I think I'm trying to see if remember if there's a picture. Here's a picture. You can see, this is an example of a school assembly where there's there's the signal with the stop hand and the stop sign, and that little car moves, and it's so the kids can pretend that there's this car, but it's not an actual car. And it teaches kids how to watch, look both ways, and make sure that they cross safely at crosswalks. This is just one example of a kind of program that they have at schools.
Yolanda?
Yeah, I hope I heard this correctly. You said that we're going to be teaching our children how to cross the street?
That's one part of it, yeah.
Okay. For the improvements, you mentioned that charter schools are going to be, is actually part of your definition of public schools. But you did mention in here that private schools would probably be looked at down the road in a few years?
We don't have any plans to.
Okay, I thought I had seen something that said that it would be.
We could. It could be, but we haven't made any firm decision.
Okay. And when you are widening the streets, you're widening them to what, 8 feet, 10 feet?
It depends. Standard, normally lanes are 10 feet each. The faster the design speed, the wider the lane.
So if you've got a 10-foot wide street that you're looking to expand, and that would probably go into someone's property,
That's one of the reasons. Well, that's why the major street, roadway and street improvements, we've assumed a much higher cost per improvement, because buying someone's right-of-way makes the project much more expensive, not just for the cost of buying it, but the cost of going through the process of buying it.
what are you looking at as far as distant to walk to a school? And I would think that just for the report, to keep it simple, you would use middle school and high school the same number. How far away would you be walking to school?
It really depends. I'm trying to remember what they do with the Traffics program. The Traffics program is the yellow school bus program in the San Ramon Valley. And that program picks up kids that are beyond a certain distance, and I'm trying to remember I think it's 3/4 of a mile, might be a half mile. And here's an example of a Safe Routes to School program. It's called a walking school bus. And a walking school bus is where a parent goes with their child, goes to the house of another child, picks up that child, and then they walk along to the next one and to the next one. So they're a bunch of kids trailing along behind, holding hands, trailing along behind a parent going to the school. And when that happens, you can do a little bit further distance. You try to minimize them down. They're kids, and walking more than a half mile can be a problem.
So you're saying 10 blocks, 10 city blocks?
Something like that, yeah. It depends on the blocks. Blocks vary considerably among the different communities.
Right. And so, I have to go back to what's also the intent to make it safe to walk to school, because I've got to think that there are schools that have gangs in them. So what becomes safe?
That is a concern. We did a survey of schools within the county, and that fear of gangs, it wasn't put of gangs, but of crime, did come up in some communities more than others. Walking school buses is one way of addressing that issue. We have kids walking as a group with a parent. that sort of thing, it's a little bit, I mean, it's hard to deal with programs and specific projects, but there are ways of doing it, and walking together as a group is one, and increased police presence around the time that kids would be walking to and from school is another.
And you also mentioned the transit buses that would take, so the schedules would then actually represent the actual times that children would be needing to be in school and when the children leave, because right now they don't.
They're better, the transit service is better in some parts of the county than others. So West County has pretty good service that children can take advantage of. Lafayette, not so much. That's why there's the Yellow School Bus Program. That's one of the big reasons why the communities in La Miranda joined together to start the La Miranda School Bus Program.
And you're looking at to provide transportation for the children, like the bus passes at some type of a reduced cost, and BART tickets at some kind of even more than what they're getting as a student?
Yes, even more than they're getting as a student. The program already exists in West County using AC Transit. Mm-hmm. And the estimated cost that we have is to expand that throughout the county.
And so I've got to think about these counties. I live in Lafayette, and contrary to popular opinion, we're not all rich there. And so if we've got school buses that take our children to school, there is a fee for that.
Yes, it's 25%.
And so there would be a fee for all the children, and then there would be some kind of sliding scale for families that find that difficult for them.
Well, that would be one of the issues of instituting yellow school bus service in other parts of the county. On average, in the La Miranda, San Ramon areas, the household incomes are higher than the other parts of the county, on average. Obviously, that doesn't apply to everyone. But in those programs, parents pay about 25% of the cost. It may be that in other parts of the county, parents would not be able to pick up even the 25%. So the subsidy would have to be higher so that maybe they'd only pay 5% or 10%, or maybe there'd be a sliding scale based on family income. That's down the line. We haven't figured out where we get the money in the first place to institute the program, so the details haven't been worked out.
Okay, thank you.
You had one?
A couple of questions. Is there going to be anything in the development of this that would require the cities or the villages or the towns and the school districts to get together and identify problem areas and develop priorities for treatment? And the other question would be, in addition to pedestrians and bicyclists, we've got to have some kind of help for the student driver training programs, because they better learn how to drive their car right if they're going to drive the car around the school. Is that part of it?
We didn't include driver training as part of this. The focus was more on walking, bicycling, and carpooling. One thing I haven't mentioned is that we do have some money for technical assistance to jurisdictions and schools, so that if jurisdiction wanted to figure out what the needs were around a particular school, we could provide some assistance to do what's called a walking audit, where you get a consultant who is familiar with Safe Routes to School issues, with a representative from the school, from parents, and from the jurisdiction to walk around the school figure out where the problem areas are, and come up with a plan on the improvements that are needed. The technical assistance could also be coming up with a plan for addressing the big issue of dealing with cars and people on foot and bicycle at the school, at the front of the school. That's a big problem. Lots of congestion, lots of people unfortunately driving a little wacky, trying to drop their kids off and get to work on time. And that's a big point of congestion during the mornings. If you drive down Treat, for example, that when Concord High and De La Salle and Carondelet are trying to get either in or at the beginning or the end of the day, it's pretty substantial. And then you've got a lot of kids walking across the crosswalk at Oak Grove and Treat. There are a lot of issues of school around the school at that point.
Yeah. Yes, you mentioned about priority. I've had my hand about 5 times now.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
It snuck in there. One of the things I was kind of missing from this was what might have been some criteria for prioritization, other than what you mentioned about you may have a few very expensive projects that are necessary. Using the example of the overcrossing at the Lake School. The other thing that might be useful is to overlay what the county incident of pedestrian car incidents are over this to help prioritize. And just a couple of quick comments about the walking school buses. It's used extensively in San Francisco by at least some people, groups, and they actually go quite a ways. And we're talking about little guys too. We're talking about 5-year-old kids, and in that case, they get the kids holding a string. Everybody holds the string and walks along, and they go all over in terms of visiting facilities in the city. Anyway, so the thing about prioritization.
We have used accident rates. Some people don't like to call them accidents, but call them collisions. Have been used as a criterion in deciding which projects get funded and which don't. And it's certainly something in this case would be a good criterion to use.
Brad, I'm just curious, to what extent did Fair and Peers actually do a physical survey?
Almost none. This was mostly done using the cost of the existing projects and the cost of the existing programs, talking to jurisdictions, staff, and talking to program staff that provide these programs. 217 schools, the cost of doing the needs assessment would have been substantially higher. It's about $5,000 for each school to do a walking audit. So 5,000 times 217.
Over $1 million.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just for doing that. And we have like 250, and we wanted to have some money to do the technical assistance. So the answer is not very little.
No, I'm just curious about that, because I think the challenge is when you look at this county, you have master planned communities with very new schools in Doherty Valley or many of the cities in East County. Then you have Orinda, for example, because Orinda is probably the most sidewalk deficient city in the county, without a doubt. And I just say
Moraga's close.
Well, okay. We get Lafayette in there too. But those are, I've been a member of Orinda's Traffic Safety Advisory Committee for 5 years, and my main concern has been trying to look at ways that we can enable kids to be able to walk or ride their bike safely to school. Because right now in our community, those who don't use the school bus, and there's fairly good usage there. But you get the parents loading up the suburban assault vehicles and driving on the roads, and of course they're only concerned about their own kids' safety. They seem to be completely oblivious in many cases to the safety of other kids. And so I just mentioned that in terms of trying to figure out we have to apply the law of averages here, I recognize that.
Yes.
But, yeah, I just wanted to see what was going on there. Thank you.
You're
You
welcome.
saved me making that comment, because I was.
Okay, Jeff?
Brad, thank you very much. I commend you guys just for undertaking this project. I think it's definitely timely needed. In terms of risk exposure, I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the Transit Authority is taking quite a bit, although you have mentioned local jurisdiction and their input and such. But from a stakeholders aspect, why aren't, and it appears that the majority of the project in terms of benefit is, well, not just general public, but the schools. And as I understand, most of the schools in California, specifically in this area, I know receiving anywhere from 3 to 13% increased budget as opposed from last year. So why aren't they involved as a major stakeholder from a financial aspect?
Well, there are a couple of reasons. One, even though they did get a lot more money, they lost a lot of money in the years before that, and they have a lot of their own issues with what they need to do with the money that they do have, and a lot more requirements, especially with testing. A lot of the improvements would be done off their site, and the jurisdictions have to be involved in that because it's their rights of way, and they're the ones who would be building the sidewalks and putting in the signage and such like. There are a lot of issues with schools and where the schools have been placed, and they're being placed in places that don't have very good access to them. There was a tragic incident in Byron where a child who lived in Discovery Bay rode his bicycle to the middle school and was hit by a woman who had just dropped off her children at the middle school and did not see the child on his bicycle as she exited the site. It's right on Byron Highway, a 2-lane highway not built for as much traffic as it carries, without any real sidewalk. The shoulders are gravel. So it's there are lots of issues with kids getting to school safely, especially when the schools are built in places that do not have good pedestrian or bicycle access. And that's especially true with the newer schools that were built away from where the subdivisions are. And there are a lot of reasons why schools get those sites and not sites that are closer in. I know that former Senator Torlakson, who's the head of the Department of Education, is looking into the issue of siting of schools. We haven't weighed in on that issue in this report. That's sort of a separate issue, but it certainly impinges on how kids get to school safely.
Thank you very much, Brad. One follow-up. In terms of, you mentioned the survey instrument that was applied initially. In terms of performance evaluation and such and measurements, I know individuals use objective data like survey. What are the type of benchmarks or performance objectivity, either objective or subjective, that you guys plan to use as you proceed in the process here?
I'm trying to remember some of the criteria that we used. Actually, we didn't use any criteria. The authority gets money from MTC. It's actually usually federal money from MTC for different kinds of projects. As part of the most recent amount of federal funds that we got through MTC, part of which was the One Bay Area grant program, there was also a Safe Routes to School program. And in that one, we just allocated the money to the regional committees, Transplan in East County, WICTAC in West County, TransPAC in Central County, and SWAT in Southwest County. And they made the decisions based on without any definite criteria. I'm trying to remember if we've used, I don't think we've had any program, a Safe Routes to School program to select projects yet that we've set specific criteria. Safety could be and probably would be one of them. There are a number of other criteria I could think of.
Thank you.
The study, if I'm understanding the methodology correctly, looked sort of backward at these projects that are already done to arrive at reasonable costs for the different categories, and then it applied the estimated number of schools with the need for a particular kind of project. And just given the 33% split, it looks like sort of rule of thumb guesstimate, or was that the result of some surveying? Because it seems to me in terms of sensitivity analysis, right, that's the number that could swing your bottom line like way one direction or another, right?
Yeah, and admittedly, that's probably the area where there's greatest variation. We're not, since we didn't do a survey of schools, and the survey we didn't give us quite enough information to know what the needs were and how many schools fit into the category of needing major project and how many needed streetscape and how many needed sidewalk improvements. This seemed reasonable based on what we knew from talking to the jurisdiction staff.
My suspicion is that given that the getting out on site is too expensive an exercise, that maybe there would be some kind of survey instrument or something with more participation from the school districts that could help you focus in on this number a little bit.
The principals could probably provide input on that.
Difficult.
It's an undertaking, though.
It is difficult to get the principals to respond. They have a lot of competing needs.
The PTA probably might. Parents probably would have some ideas. There's probably ways of getting that.
That's even harder, I've found.
What about talking to like the city's transportation managers directly? Like for San Ramon, Lisa Bodidi, our division manager, transportation division manager, is the one that looks over the Safe Routes to School and the traffics program in San Ramon. I'm sure if you would ask her or people like her in the other cities, she would know, or they would know, exactly what we need, or at least what to focus on in all the different cities.
Well, actually, Lisa is on the oversight committee.
Yeah, you mentioned that.
No one has a no one has a good handle on how the need varies among the 217 schools. And even when people don't usually think of it that way. That's the thing with the transportation managers. It's often, they have particular improvements that they know need to be done. And some of them are safer to school, and some of them are pavement management, some of them are deficient signals or, out-of-date kinds of signals. But they haven't really been pulled together under the rubric Safe Routes to School. This is what our Safe Routes to School needs are. So we did survey all of the jurisdictions and asked the transportation managers about what's needed. We only got a real general way, and it didn't quite fit into the approach that we took, unfortunately.
I have a couple of questions as to context. This is the first time we've done a full countywide assessment.
Yes.
Like this. So we've had programs that have gone under various funding streams and various organizations. First time to look. And you're beginning the review process, gradually working up to the authority board, maybe not out to the RTPCs. The object of this study is then to end up with an overall figure, a total need, which toward the end you say would be placed as a line item on the financially constrained projects list?
financially unconstrained project
Oh,
list.
unconstrained, okay, yeah.
The other place it would go is into the CTP, our countywide transportation plan. Not that it would be tied to any particular source, but just that we know that there's a significant need for improvements, and it could be the numbers that we come up with for the annual need for programs and the.
But on the
projects.
capital program side, this would be a total countywide figure appearing on a list where almost every other line item is a specific project, right?
Yeah, well, we do have some programs in it as well. It would be listed as a program number rather than a specific project. So we do have specific Safe Routes to School projects in that list as well. But we try to keep them separate because we don't like to overcount, because any specific project we assume would be included in that overall number as well.
So your hope at this point is more awareness than anything else?
Well, what we're trying to do overall, beyond just Safe Routes to School, is to get a handle on how much is needed to maintain and improve the transportation system. Yeah. And there are lots of different needs placed on the transportation system. There's people who commute, shopping, bicyclists, pedestrians, transit users, drivers. They all have different needs, carpoolers. We have a pretty good handle on the need for pavement maintenance. We're trying to get a handle. We have a figure in the countywide bike ped plan on the need for bicycle pedestrian improvements. This is another attempt to figure out what the need is for Safe Routes to School improvement. Now, there's going to be a lot of overlap between bicycle pedestrian needs and Safe Routes to School needs, because just because it's a Safe Routes to School project doesn't mean that adults can't use it as well. And vice versa. Just because it's billed as a pedestrian project doesn't mean that school kids won't use it as well.
So it may at some point be used to justify a percentage allocation,
It
much
could be.
like return to source funds and some other funds, rather
If
than
the authority-
major
yeah.
projects.
If the authority were to look at having another half-cent sales tax, or to add on to the Measure J sales tax, we could include a specific Safe Routes to School line item with some funds set aside specifically for it.
I ask this because, I've watched these processes go on for several years now, and I know they do begin, in a progression. And this is probably the start of a multi-year process to gradually increase the effort placed in this area.
Yes.
And I'm just trying to place that in this overall stream. Because frankly, some projects we deal in decade of build-up before the project actually happens. Any other questions on behalf of Sally?
Yeah. So much of this program item is about financial responsibilities, how much to allocate money for this or that. And I'm concerned on the effectiveness of the programs. How many more years is this planning to go on?
Well, as long as school kids are going to school.
You think just year after year after year?
That's a big number. I mean, you talk about millions of dollars a year to be providing that kind of, those kinds of programs, yes.
My concern is someone should be designated the role of figuring out what succeeds and what should be replicated or improved. You have here under one item, tracking changes. That's rates for walking and bicycling, but it's true for all of them. They should all be tracked somehow.
A lot of
whatever
the
you-
federal funds require a before and after for the programs. So there is some, but you're right about the general question of which programs are most effective at encouraging children to walk or bicycle and to having them walk or bicycle safely and reducing accident rates. Which programs you would like to give the money that you have, because it's possible we won't get all the money that we've identified as the need. In fact, I'd say it's likely that we wouldn't get all that money. So the question is, shouldn't the money go to the programs and projects that would have the greatest benefit? And there's the question, which we don't address in here, is how you determine that and who would determine it and when it would be determined.
Stephen, I'm listening to all this, and a lot of times over the years, the questions of the relevance of the CAC has been been questioned, and I see a real opportunity here. When I'm listening to this, I see Safe Schools being something that's kind of neglected, doesn't have a priority, and I would like to suggest for next month's meeting or whenever we have the next meeting, to really discuss this issue and what the CAC can do about this. Some of the thoughts I have would be that I think we should write a letter. I'm not sure if, this is the Brown Access, we really can't discuss this, but I think there might be an opportunity for us to write a position letter to the authority saying that they should give priority to the Safe Schools, and also, as far as funding goes. But listening to what Brad was saying about the difficulty of identifying projects, we here all have, access to our city managers, our city schools, the transportation authorities. Maybe the CAC can take a proactive role in assigning all of its members, with a focused thing of getting with our transportation managers or city managers, if there's a transportation subcommittee, to really say, how can the schools be made safer in their jurisdictions? I see a real opportunity here for the CAC to do something very proactive. And I would like to suggest next month maybe we have a discussion on that, what we can do and how to proceed in doing that.
I'll work with crafting a suitable agenda item for that. You had something?
Great point. Yes, thank you. I think that's well said. Well said. I think it's timely and very appropriate. In terms of prioritization, when it comes to public performance evaluation and such for public agencies, one of the keys for any projects, of course, is like this young lady said, how do we prioritize? Obviously, everyone wants to get funded, but at the end of the day, it's not very real. I mean, it's ideology, it's fine, but from a pragmatic standpoint, it just doesn't happen. So you guys you probably do not have a prioritization list right at this point, I would imagine?
Not now, no. This is just, overall need, not what are the priorities. If we had a set of funding and we were going to use it to fund projects, we would have a certain set of criteria. I think pretty sure that safety would be one, or identified safety issue. There could be other ones. Normally we have, is the project ready? How far is it going? Do they have more matching funds than, because we'd like to spend enough to get the project off the ground, but not some, and try to give it to as many projects as possible. I mean, I can think of some other criteria we could use as well. But normally in those kinds of we don't just flip a coin or throw a dart at the names on a wall. We usually have some set of criteria and have different reviewers look at them.
Thank you, Brad.
Wouldn't you consider then, as part of your project, part of your report, that you would indicate in that the steps that would be taken to get a project approved, what would be the considerations that a jurisdiction would need to follow?
That's not something we would put into this report. Now, there were earlier comments about maybe we need to make this report, flesh it out and put it within a broader context of what Safe Route School is and what it can do, and we're not trying to set priorities, and until we do,
I don't think you need to set priorities, but you need to give the jurisdictions that are going to look at what their needs are for Safe Route to School, to look at them more honestly and think about what is likely to get done and what likely not to get done. So let's develop a system to provide that evaluation process.
Okay.
Kind of comment, observation, particularly back to Sally. Richmond went through the general plan process here, stretching back. It drug on for about 7 or 8 years, all told. And there was a bicycle pedestrian plan and a health component in that. And one of the things that we found out in doing this is that now, while obviously you obviously have to meet the needs of an individual area, all of this stuff has been done. There's nothing new under the sun with regard to this stuff. There are examples all over the place. What was really an eye-opener is how far behind many other places California actually is. We can draw on a lot of experience out there and overlay that over our own unique conditions. But there's a lot out there that's already been tested, proven, and in place, and we're really behind the curve in California. It's really remarkable when you see the stuff that has not happened in California.
So I also have an observation, and this is a fabulous program. I'd love to see it implemented throughout the county, through the schools. It really, to me, it just rings at changing the culture. We have a love affair with our cars. I'll speak only for Lafayette. Get those Lafayette mommies out of the car. Are you kidding? Ain't happened. Walking from house to house and having a string of kids behind you like the Pied Piper, I don't see it. I want to. I think it's great. I sent both my boys to De La Salle. They walked from my home to pick up the bus when the bus was running. Took Bart, got off the train here, and either took the bus or walked to De La Salle. But that's just, originally from New York City. You walk. I know my kids went through a lot with their friends. You walked? When are you getting a car? My mother said, never. You're going to buy your own car. I'm not buying you a car. So I think that it really is a great step toward attempting to change a culture. It's going to take a while, but it's programs like this that will lead to it. So.
You did not convince me about the private schools, because it means every kids are equal, but in public school are more equal. We don't take care of this from private schools. The parents, I repeat, pay taxes. They don't take money from state coffer. It's true. It's true. In Pinot, it's true. Yes, the Catholic school in Pinot, it's true. And maybe some, but most of them, they have own financial sources. Some are connected to churches, some not. And say, hey, they are private. When on the street in the center of the city, we take care of sidewalks, of streets, of bumps to slow the traffic. 100% of businesses is private, and we take care of them. And here we discriminate some other people. You said in school in the morning, parents are in rush because they must go to work. In private school is similar situation, even more cars. And if we vote on these documents, I will vote against, because this is kind of discrimination. Maybe allocation of money will be different, more for public school, but we cannot exclude completely second category of kids. They don't need safe access to school and safe access to home. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the larger context there, of course, is complete streets, because I don't, ultimately, you would want all of your streets to meet sort of the same criteria with regard to safety and usefulness and effectiveness with regard to moving people around. So under the rubric of complete streets, we would not exclude, quote unquote, private schools. You're interested in public safety, and that becomes the criteria.
Okay, well, if there are no more further questions or comments, I want to thank Brad for his presentation. I hope we've given
very
some
welcome.
useful feedback.
Yes, actually it was. Thank you.
Okay. Pass on to committee reports. I'm only reporting on one meeting, so I have not provided printed copies. I'll email you my text later. For the March 19th last week meeting of the Authority Board, among the other items passed in the consent calendar were the mid-year budget revisions and some very preliminary steps for rebuilding of the SR4 I-680 interchange. And I mean, it's very preliminary. I'm just looking at the APC agenda, and there's a lot of work to be done before that project even becomes ready for serious design.
I will add that it was a real mess today, the worst I've ever seen.
Yeah, it's terrible.
Yeah, it's bad. Well, it's what 24 680 used to be. First time I ever came out here, when I got creamed by a Winnebago, I didn't realize the weaving that was going on. The first major discussion item was a presentation on the Clipper program by Carol Kuster. I guess that's the pronunciation, the MTC Director for Electronic Payments. That puts her in charge of both Clipper and Fast Track. And the presentation covered the program history, the just approved expansion to include the 3 county bus transit services. So that'll be County Connection, Tri-Delta, and Westcat, is it called? Yeah. And planning for, and that will be taking place from April of 2014 through February of 2016. And planning for a full system replacement, possibly with a new vendor by November of 2019 when the current contract ends. The Clipper infrastructure is getting pretty dated, so they'd like to bring it forward to a lot of the newer stuff, a lot more smartphone usage, things like that. Second major discussion item was an update on the 2014 countywide transportation plan outreach effort, including results of a second telephone poll. The polling focused on support for a possible extension and 1/2 cent increase in the countywide sales tax for transportation and on which major projects focus should be placed. The board discussed the next steps, especially with regard to the timing of putting the measure on the ballot. The board consensus was to wait until November of 2016, and staff was directed to come back in April with the draft plan toward that date. From my recollection of the presentation, the polling pulled out at very close to the required 2/3 majority. But one thing the pollster did point out was between November of 2014 and November 2016, there's about a 4-point improvement. Also going 2014, that has to be together by August. It would have been a very aggressive time frame. And I think the board in general felt that more education was going to be needed. The final regular discussion item was proposed authority comments to the Governor's Office in Planning and Research regarding the implementation of Senate Bill 743. That was signed by the Governor September of last year, relaxes some of the requirements for California Environmental Quality Act, review of projects in transit priority areas, and also proposes to eliminate level of service calculations as a part of CEQA review in all areas, thus removing delay of automobile traffic as a consideration for review. The authority objects to this second provision being applied to areas outside of transit priority areas and approved with one negative vote the sending of a comments letter to that effect. This may seem like a lot of inside ball, but I think this has a fairly important effect in how you're really evaluating projects, especially when you do the Environmental Quality Act review. One of the highlights of the executive director's comments, he usually has quite a few things he's involved in, was a report on a visit to Google to experience their self-driving car, at which time he proposed that an urban street within Contra Costa County be used for further system testing, further vehicle testing. And the other major thing he announced was the groundbreaking for the State Route 4, State Route 160 connector project ramps. Project will probably take place in April. Actually, they have just begun construction activities this week. So for those of us, well, anybody who would like to try to get to take 160 and continue on eastbound on Highway 4. It would eliminate a major hassle. So are there any questions?
Did they provide some more details about self-driving cars?
No, he just said that he got a chance to experience it, and he volunteered the county for a test site. Okay, are there any other questions? We'll pass on to...
With that card you'll go into BART with now, the new card you say they discussed?
Clipper?
Clipper card, yes. How do you use that on a bus?
Muni and AC Transit actually have fare equipment, which includes a Clipper card reader.
Yeah, I used to run the program back when I was a transportation planner, when I worked for MTC. And yeah, what they do is they put the card readers on board the buses, and either just at the front door or also the front and the back door, depending on whether the service is running a zone system. It's a little thing about this big, a piece of plastic, and that's part of what they want to upgrade. It's been out there. Yeah, we did the design on that thing in 2001 or something. So it was before there were smartphones and things. So it's pretty old. And they're still not done rolling it out. They'll never be done rolling it out. So
I think the delay in going it out here was just a lack of physical unit availability.
Well, I think what it more fundamentally was is that 3CTA was the pilot site for the first generation of TransLink built on the BART ticket. And so they were given a pass. They were asked to go to the back of the line, understandably so, because they suffered greatly as a test subject, and MTC was more than happy to let them slot in wherever they wanted to. So, and then in recent years, I'm sure they're having trouble manufacturing those things since the vendor went out of business. So.
Any other comments general comments by members of the committee? Okay. Anybody have any suggestions or comments on future agenda items? Would you want me to see if we could get Ms. Kuster out here to talk about Clipper at a future meeting?
Yeah, I'd like to see Carol again. That would be fun.
Yeah, one thing that I would actually be interested in is how SB 743 is going to be affecting us. I was actually talking with Dave Hudson about the implementation of SB 743, and I'm very scared about it. And I would definitely like to hear more information on it from someone that knows about it.
Well, as I say, it was a very, as I understand it, was very highly targeted relaxation of environmental quality. In places where the priority is going to be placed on transit.
Yeah. Well, the way he explained it to me was that any area that has a PDA on it, which essentially is like 80% of all developments now, he was telling me, you no longer have to look at CEQA, you no longer have to look at level of service. And so 80% of development don't need to worry about traffic. That's a big problem. you know?
Well, that's why the authority is
I want to hear more
writing
about
the
that.
letter it is.
Yeah.
It's pretty complicated. The legislation establishes what are called transit priority areas, or TPAs, and they have a definition of what those areas are. And most priority developments areas would meet that criteria. And in those areas, the law says that when you do CEQA, and CEQA still applies to the areas, but when you do it, you cannot use level of service or auto delay as a finding of significant impact.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The law also says that they can also propose changes to CEQA that would eliminate the use of level of service outside of these transit priority areas as well. So if you did a project on San Pablo Dam Road between Arinda and El Sobrante, you couldn't use level of service as well. Now, you can use vehicle delay when you assess air quality impacts, because it has an effect on air quality and it has an effect on noise. So you can continue to use it to find a significant air quality impact, but not a significant transportation impact. And it's even more complicated than that. That's the short discussion.
But there's a little longer, not long philosophical discussion. A very short one is that what are we going to build the infrastructure of society for? Human beings or cars? So if you build a street that has a very high throughput of cars, all your safe routes to schools and all your complete streets and all that nice stuff goes right out the window because you can't have both.
Steve, on the menu here showing possible future meeting topics, the one that catches my eye is passenger freight rail plans. Is there somebody on the staff who wants to talk about that?
There might be. There is a new Joint Powers Authority that's addressing passenger rail service in the San Joaquin Valley, connecting San Francisco and the San Joaquin. It's a
That connect
county.
with Highway 4?
Well, it focuses on passenger rail service from Bakersfield north to San Francisco and Sacramento. So it's, when I say multi-county, it's like 12 counties.
But it includes the Carquinez Strait area?
Yeah. And I'm not sure which staff, I think it's Peter Engel, but I can't remember who's on that, who was on the technical advisory committee. I'm pretty sure it's Peter, but I'm not entirely certain. They just started work, so I don't know how much information there is on any, there's information about the program, but there's not any specific analysis that's ready for public.
I attended that huge forum out in Antioch about a month or so ago. People who are so interested in developing new jobs out there and using old properties that have not been used sufficiently lately. And I think this is a hot topic for a lot of people, and the trains have something to do with that, as well as ship channels. And
Yeah, are you referring to the northern waterfront?
yes,
Yes, sir. That's it.
northern waterfront.
That's a separate effort that's going on now, going from Hercules through Antioch.
But it includes so much that affects the rest of the highway system too.
I would assume that the whole JPA is kind of still in the organizational process, just beginning to shake itself down.
For the train, the
Yeah.
passenger rail service, yeah, it's. I'm not involved in that, so I can't give you any specifics about what stage they're at now.
Because as I remember, the authority, maybe in the neighborhood of a year ago, received a separate presentation by Caltrans Rail Department, there actually is such a thing, about their plans for that whole corridor, especially leading through that same northern waterfront area, double and triple tracking to increase the capacity of the line on out toward Stockton. And also increase over time to maybe 14 San Joaquin trains per day.
Yeah, just a quick question. You mentioned the air quality. How frequently does the numbers change due to the, more efficient gasoline engines, the shift more to hybrids, and starting to be a big increase in electric vehicles? How frequently do they change the air quality numbers of the gases that get generated to affect that?
Well, it depends on the day. It depends on who's driving. There are some estimates. The state California Air Quality Board does do estimates of what the contribution that transportation will make to air quality or greenhouse gas emissions and other air pollutants over the years through at least through I think they're up to 2035 in their public estimates. There are a lot of requirements on what the overall fleet of automobiles and light utility vehicles must meet, and we're assuming that there will be this continual drop in per vehicle level of emissions, but there will be more vehicles driving, which will offset the drop somewhat. So there is an estimate. Well, there's an assumption. They have a model. It's an MFAC. I can't remember what the number they're at now, and I can't remember what MFAC stands for. But they have an assumption that in any year there will be the efficiency and amount of pollution produced per mile for vehicles will be X, and then you estimate how many miles there will be in that year. You can estimate how many tons of pollutants will be generated.
Okay, well, I believe we have gotten through the entire agenda.
Will we adjourn?
Yes, sir. Prior to adjourning, I'd like to, for next meeting as an agenda item, perhaps we can further discuss the gentleman's recommendation regarding the Safe Routes to School program in terms of what we can do as an organization, or as a public, as a body, in terms of to be more of an advocate. If we can get that on the agenda, that would really be
I
nice.
said I will work
All
with
right,
staff
thank
to
you
get
very
that on
much.
the agenda.
Make sure. Thank you.
All right, well, I'll declare us adjourned to our next regular meeting. Thank you all.